Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be checking out the HGLRC BATMAN220. Now, I was pretty excited to see HGLRC bring out a 5-inch model, especially after how much I loved the XJB145 3-inch. And I have to say, they have not disappointed with this one either. So when I first looked at it, I thought, that is a hefty price tag. But when you look at the price of the Hawk 5, it's only 40 quid or $60 or whatever more than that. And I do think this has more than 40 quid of upgraded components. Alright, it comes as a plug and fly, so you've got to add your receiver, and I'm using a XM Plus here, which is like 12 quid or something like that. And of course, it's down to personal preference whether you think you need these upgraded components or not, but for me, they are welcome. And I think it's safe to say that the Hawk 5 is the one to beat at the moment, and that is what this model is competing against. And compared to the Hawk 5, this one has got the HGLRC Titan stack, which has 60 amp BL-Heli 32-bit ESCs against the 30 amp BL-Heli S of the Hawk 5. I'm surprised to see the Titan stack doesn't have ESC telemetry though. But the ESCs can take up to a 6S voltage, whereas the Hawk 5 is only rated for 4S, although I believe there are some people running 5S on it. But this stack is rated for it, and the motors are rated for 5S. So, speaking of the motors, they are a bigger size, being a 2306 2450 kV HGLRC branded motor. Now, the jury is still out there for me whether the 23 stator motor is overkill when it comes to the top end speed of a 5-inch. The Hawk 5 with its 2206 motor and Avan Flow props currently holds the top speed for a 4S at 106 mph for me in my testing, and anything else that I've tried with a 23 stator motor can't quite reach those speeds, not on a 4S anyways. But nonetheless, this is a really nice motor, and it's got a hollow shaft and they are a naked bottom. But something I really like about this is the bracket at the bottom, which stops the motor wires from catching the bell. And this is a problem that I was having on the new RS2 motors from Emax. The heat shrink runs very close to the bell, and in some instances it catches. So I think this is a really neat idea. They do unfortunately use a C-clip, which I'm not a fan of, as a hex screw is easier. If everything gets caked in mud, you can take the motors apart and clean them out easier. The frame is actually very similar in design to the Hawk 5. We've got 5mm arms and a better camera protection with this one up the front. There's a silicon mat installed underneath, however I don't think much passion has gone into the placement of that. It's looking a little bit wonky. You're given a HGLRC battery strap, which isn't the highest of quality, but it does its job. The soldering looks really nice on the stack, and they have installed the capacitor. The only thing I'll say about that is I think they should have installed the capacitor on the top solder pad and not the bottom, because the battery cable is going to pull down and it pulls the capacitor down with it. It's a small criticism, but it seems like an obvious one to me. So the flight controller is an Omnibus F4 with a Betaflight on-screen display, and the flight controller is soft mounted, and compared to the Hawk 5 it doesn't have much setup on there, so I had to turn on anti-gravity, air mode and dynamic filters. There weren't any modes set up either, so I had to put all of those in. It's set up as 8K 4K, and with this being the MPU 6000, 8K is the limit, so I've left it at that. and it just has stock rates in there, so I've put my custom ones in, but it does seem to have custom PIDs, so I'm going to try those. Now, there's no buzzer installed on this model either, so I've set up D-Shot commands, and D-Shot 1200 was already set up in the configuration, but basically it needs a full setup apart from the PIDs. So, if you aren't accustomed to Betaflight, then the Hawk 5 is going to win this round. It does have the current sensor hooked up, which is a nice to have. So I've soldered in the XM Plus. They do leave these wires soldered in for you, as well as a wire for PPM and DSMX, which I have desoldered by removing the top plate. It was all set up for S-Bus in Betaflight, I should say. So above the flight controller we have the VTX, and for me this is the biggest upgrade compared to the Hawk 5 because it's switchable from 25 milliwatt all the way up to 600 milliwatts. So if you're trying to fly through brick walls like I was the other day, then this is going to do a better job than the 200 milliwatt of the Hawk 5. And it also has smart audio, which is a feature that I really miss on the Hawk 5. It's also using a MMCX connector, and it has a nice display for your abandoned channels, and there's a button there as well. Now, it comes with a whip antenna installed, but they do provide a SMA pigtail if you want to swap it out. I think the camera is probably this model's weak point. It's HGLRC's own CCD camera, and it's okay, but we'll have a look at it later. It doesn't have the vibration issue that it had on the Hornet, but it was slightly out of focus. Luckily, the lens isn't glued in, so I could twist it into focus, and it does sit pretty tight, so there's no need to add any hot glue or anything like that, but I'll talk more about its performance later. And of course, you can alter the camera angle with the 1.5mm hex screws on the side. Its weight with the props on is 302 grams, so about 20 grams heavier than the Hawk 5, but it is very similar. Now, you are given the Gemfan 5042 props, which I thought was a strange choice because it's a low-pitch freestyle prop, and this is a racing model. But I think they've done that for those who want to go 5S, perhaps, so you don't put so much strain on the motors. However, for 4S, I'm going to be using these Dal Cyclone 5046 tri-blades, because with a 60 amp ESC, 5042 props on a 4S isn't going to be taking advantage of that. And even these 5046 props are quite conservative, and I would say that this is something you can do with this setup over the Hawk 5, is push the system more with heavier pitched props, and of course that will also push your battery, but that's how we roll in 2018. So, I'm going to be using the Tattoo 1550 4S, and I've given up on 1300 milliamp batteries because in every single test, the 1550 has been able to provide more amps and less voltage sag than a 1300, and you get more speed out of the 1550, and the flight time is longer. So, in the package you are also given some spare screws for the motors, and you're given some stickers and a very short manual that doesn't tell you everything you need to know. So as I say, you need to be accustomed to Betaflight. So let's get and take it for a fly and see how it performs. So the first thing I noticed is how clean the video feed is, which is probably the most important thing to me in a copter. And usually the more power a VTX has, the more noise it puts out in the video feed. So I'm really pleased to see a clean video feed. So, talking about the camera earlier, and you can see that the center is offset. The two motors are not equal at the side of the screen, and I'm not sure why that is, because the camera is bang in the middle of the copter. I mean, it's not a huge deal, and the camera quality is good, but if there's one thing I would change with this copter, it would be the camera. So the next thing I want to talk about is how it flies, because this is hands down one of the smoothest copters I have ever flown out of the box, and I'm not getting any prop wash oscillations, and it just makes me look like a really good solid pilot. And I think it's down to the premium parts that are being used here. So I talk a lot about the speed of a copter on this channel, but really the smoothness of a copter and how it flies is way more important, and I think that's these motors along with the dowel prop, and it's just superb to fly, and I think it flies better and smoother than the Hawk 5. You know, the Hawk 5 is a great copter, but this one is just a little bit better for me. And I did do some speed runs with this copter, and I think it clocked 103 miles per hour as its top speed. So it's definitely up there with the Hawk 5, and I dare say with a heavier pitch prop it could match or exceed the Hawk 5 on its top speed, and on a 5S I think it would certainly do that. Now, looking at the current meter, which seems to be bang on accurate, it's drawing around 80 amps on the full throttle runs, and the ESCs are capable of much more abuse than that. So in short, I think HGLRC have really pulled it out of the bag with this one, and it does exceed the Hawk 5 for me. And that's not to say the Hawk 5 isn't a decent model. What we have here now is two top 5-inch headliner models to pick from, and what I want to put out there to these companies is that there is an abundance of 5-inch RTF race drones now, with the Hawk 5 and the Batman nailing it at the top end, and I think what we are missing now is some headlining freestyle models that get the props out of shot for the GoPro to compete with the Reverbs and the Aliens out there. But in general, I really like the HGLRC BATMAN220, and I thoroughly recommend it. So there is my take on it, and I will link it in the below. And if you can afford to do so, I'll link my Patreon in there as well. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.